All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining United Spinal Association Greater Philadelphia Chapter's monthly educational webinar series. We are very excited to have Emily Jenkins here with us tonight to talk about the legal clinic for the disabled. Emily Jenkins is a supervising attorney at the Legal Clinic for the Disabled. She manages LCD's Medical Legal Partnership Initiative, which includes partnership with 6 different organizations across 9 different sites in the Philadelphia area. She also staffs LCD's Medical Legal Partnership with St. Christopher's Hospital for Children in Northeast Philadelphia, where she provides direct legal services to St. Christopher's patients and their families. Emily earned her JD from the City University of New York School of Law, is a member of the Pennsylvania Bar, and joined LCD in January of 2020. Welcome, Emily. We also want to thank our sponsors for tonight's webinar, the New Motion Foundation. New Motion Foundation's mission is to support people and causes that work towards enhancing the lives of people with disabilities in communities of common interest. Their vision is to engage employees and supporters to donate funds and provide a centralized, coordinated, and compliant gateway for distribution on behalf of New Motion to advocacy groups, policy influencers, and charitable programs. During the webinar, please use the chat feature for any questions you may have, or communicate via the chat if you would like to be unmuted to engage in more dialogue with our presenter. Please view the chat box at the end of the webinar for links to our YouTube channel, where you can view this and others of our webinars, and also view a link to our membership page if you are not currently a member of the Greater Philadelphia chapter. I would now like to welcome and introduce Emily Jenkins.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Megan. I really appreciate that introduction. Hi, everybody. As Megan said, my name is Emily Jenkins. I'm a supervising attorney at the Legal Clinic for the Disabled. Thanks for joining tonight at 6:30 on a Wednesday night. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can take a look at the slides that I have together. Okay, so tonight I'm hoping, and let me just say, hopefully that you guys are seeing the presentation. Megan, would you mind letting me know if that's showing correctly?
You're actually seeing presenter mode.
Okay, that's what I was worried about. All right. Let's see. Hold on, I will share a different screen. Let's see. Go ahead and share. Share. And then if I start from beginning, Megan, is that better?
That's perfect.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. All right, so as I said before, my name's Emily. I'm a supervising attorney with the Legal Clinic for the Disabled. And tonight, I'm going to talk about public benefits and advanced planning documents. As Megan said, please submit your questions in the chat as we go along. And just the obligatory lawyer disclosure, this presentation is meant to provide information only, and it shouldn't be considered legal advice for your specific situation. If you would like advice about your specific situation, feel free to contact LCD to speak to an attorney to ask those questions. So the roadmap for tonight's presentation, in the beginning, I'm going to talk a little bit about LCD. So that you know what we do and what services we provide. And then we're going to talk about public benefits. This is definitely going to be a pretty high level overview, right? We don't have a ton of time tonight, but this will hopefully introduce you to the different types of public benefits. And those different kinds of public benefits are going to be income support benefits, food, housing benefits, and medical. And then we're going to move on, switch gears pretty considerably to talk about advanced planning documents. So that would include powers of attorney, living wills, and wills. And then I'm going to do my best to leave as much time as I can for questions. So talking about LCD, so we're a legal aid organization. So we provide free legal services to low income people who suffer from chronic physical or mental health condition in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. And so our main goal is to help our clients overcome legal obstacles that they have that might affect their ability to be independent and lead health and safe lives. So the services that we provide, we only practice in the civil realm. So we don't do any criminal, no traffic, no personal injury or medical malpractice, anything like that. But most civil issues we will handle. So housing work is a huge part of what we do. Unfortunately, in Philadelphia, there's just a serious shortage of affordable, safe housing. So we find a lot of what we do is in the housing realm. Landlord-tenant disputes, evictions, issues with subsidized housing, utility shutoffs, all kinds of things related to housing. We also assist with help with public benefits. We're going to talk more about those later. We do a lot of work with family law issues, so custody, child support, certain types of divorces we'll assist with. We'll assist with intimate partner violence cases. We'll do advanced planning documents. And then for any of the issues we don't handle, we try to make a referral to an organization that will. So eligibility. So since we provide free legal services, we do have eligibility criteria to be able to access those services. So the individual must have a chronic physical or mental health condition or be deaf or hard of hearing. Our definition of a chronic health condition is very broad. So it includes asthma, ADHD. So it's very broad in order for us to provide services to as many people as possible. The individual must also live in a household that has an income that's no greater than 200% of the federal poverty level. And 200% might sound like a big number, but the federal poverty, 100% of the federal poverty level is just like laughable. So even at 200%, that is still a very low income family. And then the individual must reside or have a legal matter in Philadelphia or the surrounding counties. So that would be Bucks, Chester, Delaware, or Montgomery counties. So how to get in touch with us, if you're looking to seek out services from LCD. As Megan mentioned, we have several different medical legal partnerships throughout Philadelphia. And a medical legal partnership is essentially embedding an attorney into the healthcare setting to address the unmet legal needs of the patients. It's part of a preventative law approach, right? To essentially have an attorney meet with a family before they're in crisis. Obviously, if that family is in crisis, when they meet with the attorney, we'd still help. But the idea of an MLP is to try to get that family connected with legal services to give them the information that they need and set them up for success so that they don't end up in crisis. So we have 6 different partnerships, and they are in 9 different physical sites around Philadelphia. And our newest one is Nemours Children's Health at their Center City, Philadelphia location. And so we're looking to expand the model. We really believe in the model. And so we're hoping to expand it to even more health centers. But we can also be found via our general intake line and also the landlord-tenant hotline that we have. So you might have to leave a message. We're a pretty small organization, actually. We have about 17 staff, I think 12 attorneys. So if you leave a message and we'll call you back. We don't always have somebody able to man the phone at all business hours, but we always try to give you a call back within 2 business days. All right. So that's it about LCD. Now let's talk about public benefits. So the major public benefits fall into these different categories. I mentioned them earlier. So for food, we've got SNAP, also most commonly known as food stamps, and WIC. And then for income support, we have TANF, more commonly known as welfare or cash assistance. And then we've got 2 different kinds of Social Security disability benefits. There's public housing benefits. I don't know if you guys are familiar with PHA, Philadelphia Housing Authority. Section 8, HUD is like the federal version of that. There's also emergency shelters that are provided by the city. And then there's medical. So Medicaid in Pennsylvania is called medical assistance, but that's what that's referring to. And then CHIP, and we'll talk about that. For most of these benefits, unfortunately, there is generally a status requirement, either that the person is a U.S. citizen or a qualified immigrant. And there's some examples of what would be considered a qualified immigrant, a green card holder, somebody who's been granted asylum, things like that. And they've been in the US for at least 5 years. So let's get into some of the details about this. So SNAP, like I said, more commonly known as food stamps. So this is a federal program that's managed by the PA Department of Human Services. So it's federal funds. And that might be one of the reasons why there's a US citizenship requirement. Luckily, if any children in the household are US citizens, even if they don't have citizen parents, they're still eligible for SNAP. And SNAP doesn't have a kind of a time limit, right? Like you don't use up the benefits, but you do need to reapply every 6 months. So that generally means a lot of paperwork that you got to provide to the county assistance office. That can be a whole obstacle in and of itself, but as long as you remain eligible, you will continue to get these benefits. And essentially they're benefits that are put on an access card, kind of like, it looks like a credit card. And basically you can use that to buy food. And the recipients get the payment, a lump sum payment every month. Now, what about multi-family households, right? So you might have, multiple families living in the same household. The way that SNAP determines, who is on a SNAP case is who prepares and eats meals together. So they don't define it as who lives together, it's who prepares and eats meals together. So you could have multiple SNAP beneficiaries under the same roof, right? If they are, buying their food separately and preparing and eating their meals separately. So that's SNAP, and that's a big one, right? It's huge for our clients, right? And it really helps, in some way bridge the gap, right? Whenever they're living in poverty. And we don't actually count the assistance they receive via SNAP against their eligibility for our services. So that's SNAP. WIC stands for Women, Infants, and Children. And it's kind of just what it sounds like, but it's essentially a food benefit for women, infants, and children. So children 5 and under, pregnant women, postpartum women, breastfeeding women. So what's nice about this benefit is there isn't a citizenship requirement. And it's a lot like SNAP, except they receive a voucher to purchase specific food items, more specific than what the SNAP requirements are. And so those would be things like formula, eggs, milk, cheese. So those items that have been deemed more important for the group of people who are eligible for this benefit. So that's WIC. All right, now moving on to income support benefits. So SSI, it stands for Supplemental Security Income. And so this is one of the Social Security disability benefits that I had mentioned earlier. So this is a federal income supplement for disabled adults. And so to be eligible, the applicant has to meet an income eligibility, and also they have to meet Social Security's definition of disability. And so for the income requirement, it's pretty strict. It's going to require the applicant to have no more than pretty much $2,000 to their name. They can own a car, but they have to use it for transportation. They can own a home, but they have to live in it. So for SSI, they're very strict on the income eligibility requirement. It's essentially a benefit for the very poor. And then the way that Social Security defines disability is that the individual has a marked or extreme functional limitation, and that needs to either have already lasted for 12 months or be expected to last for at least 12 months, or potentially result in the applicant's death. Now, for SSI for adults, the big question is, can they work, right? So that tends to be the real determining factor when it comes to that part of the eligibility criteria is can this person work? And Social Security will come up with all kinds of creative ways that the person could work. And so that's sometimes something to argue over if they have to appeal a denial. So that's SSI for adults. There is SSI for children, right? So for minors. This is just like with SSI for adults. It's a federal income supplement for childhood disability. The income requirements are determined by the parent's income, right? So it's obviously not the child's income or assets, it's the household, generally the parents. And then the child needs to meet the disability criteria. Now, it's definitely not going to be the same exactly as it would be for an adult, right? Because Social Security doesn't expect the child to, be able to work and hold down a job. So it still has the kind of the same language in terms of marked and extreme functional limitation, but with minor SSI, it's really more about comparing that child to a child of the same age that's unimpaired, right? So how does this child compare to the average child of that age? What should this child be able to do at this age? What are the milestones? Is that child meeting them? So it's those kinds of determinations. And for both SSI for adults and for children, the medical records are going to be extremely important for determining eligibility. So sometimes that can be an issue for somebody applying because Social Security is supposed to be getting the records directly from the providers, but they don't always do a great job of getting that. So that's SSI. Now I mentioned there were two, there's SSDI. So this stands for Social Security Disability Insurance. And this is basically, for disabled individuals, adults only, who have a qualifying work history, right? So the idea is that, okay, this individual has essentially worked for a requisite period of time. The Social Security insurance was withheld from the paychecks. And so now that this person is disabled and can no longer work, they're going to draw down, from that kind of fund that they've paid into. And so there aren't any income or asset requirements. I forgot to mention earlier, but the max benefit for SSI is currently $841 per month. So that's not a lot of money if that's, the individual's only income. And so that's why it's helpful that there's SNAP, right, to try to help bridge the gap. And so for SSDI, the benefit's not capped at that low level. The benefit amount per month is going to be determined by the amount of work history, right? So the amount the individual has paid into it. So the definition of disability, or the eligibility criteria for disability, is going to be the same for SSDI and SSI. And it's basically, can you work? Is the big question there. But the other, in addition to not having the income and asset limitations, SSDI has an additional benefit that there is something called derivative benefits. So essentially, if somebody is receiving SSDI and they are the primary caretaker of one or more children, they will actually receive additional benefits for those children. So that's another big plus of getting SSDI. All right, so TANF, this is something, this is also a federal program, kind of like SNAP, that's managed by the state. And this is cash, right? So a lot of times, what our clients will call it will be cash. Sometimes they'll call it welfare. I never hear anyone call it TANF or TANF, which is actually the name. Like I said, it's cash, right? So it's actually a cash grant that somebody will receive twice a month. And it has very strict resource limits, right? So this is a benefit for really the kind of those individuals in extreme poverty. The resource limit is $1,000. And as you can imagine, if you're eligible for TANF, you're going to be eligible for food stamps as well. In terms of who qualifies, it's kind of in the name, needy families. So dependent children, relatives of those children, and then pregnant women. And with TANF, unlike with SNAP, right? TANF, you only have a certain amount of time, right? That you are eligible for that benefit. And then basically you've used it up and you're not eligible anymore. I think it might be 6 years. But anyway, it's not something that if you continue to be under the resource limit and continue to, be eligible in terms of having children, once you use the benefit up, it's used up. All right, so housing, there's public housing. And so PHA, I mentioned the Philadelphia Housing Authority. So this is like traditional public housing, right? Where the housing itself is owned and managed by PHA. This is where the rent is usually determined by the income, right? It's a percentage of the income. Sometimes it includes a utility allowance. There's also housing choice voucher. So this is basically a subsidy in which the family or the tenant has a housing choice voucher. They use it in the private market, and PHA pays a portion of their rent directly to that private landlord. Instead of the individual living in housing that's owned and managed by PHA, they're in a private landlord-tenant agreement, but a portion of their rent is paid by a subsidy. And then there's project-based, right? So this is also a voucher, but it's a little different because the voucher is with the unit, with the particular housing, as opposed to with the family. So it's more restrictive. And then, for somebody to seek that type of assistance out, they need to apply directly with the owner of the building. And then if they leave, unlike with a housing choice voucher, they don't take it with them, right? Because the voucher stays with the unit. All right, so Medicaid, known as medical assistance here in PA, is essentially medical insurance. There's also citizenship requirements, there's income guidelines. And the thing is that, it's not just for people, who don't work. There's plenty of people, based on this stat, 71% of enrollees are actually, individuals where there's somebody who works in the family. It just goes to show that insurance is extremely expensive. And so, they've had to kind of expand eligibility, because they realize that, having a certain income doesn't mean you can afford medical insurance. So the kind of, I mentioned the citizenship requirement, this can be tough, but I think that's why they came up with CHIP, so Children's Health Insurance Program. So this is essentially free or low cost health insurance for children under 19 and who are living in a family that doesn't qualify for Medicaid, right? So for example, if the parents maybe are undocumented, they're not eligible for Medicaid, but they could have their children enrolled in CHIP. So this covers most medical, visits and things like that. And so that's a good option for families where Medicaid's not possible. All right, so how to apply? So how to apply for the state run benefits? Basically, you're gonna, it's managed by it's managed by the state, and they have county assistance offices, or kind of the physical locations all around Pennsylvania. And so to apply, for any of those particular benefits, you can do it in person, you can do it online. You could print out a paper copy of the application and mail it in. They let you apply for SNAP or medical assistance over the phone. And then what I always like to tell clients is that there's an organization in Philadelphia. So this is just for individuals in Philadelphia, but Benefili will assist with the application and then also follow up on that application, which is really key sometimes with these different applications. So that's how you can apply for those type of benefits. For SSI or SSDI, you're going to have to apply directly with the Social Security Administration. You can do that over the phone or online. And for an adult disability benefits, you can do the whole thing online. For a minor's SSI application, you can do like half of it online, and then you have to do the other half over the phone. So, and then for public housing benefits, for the housing choice voucher, or to, live in public housing, you have to do that directly with PHA. All the programs have wait lists, and they're notorious. I mean, they're like 13 years long, I've seen for some of them. And so some of the wait lists are actually even closed, right? So they're not even letting people get on the wait list for some of these programs just because of the number of people on them. Some of the wait lists are open, like I think for senior housing and maybe some other specialized housing, but most of them are closed. And then for project-based voucher units, like I mentioned earlier, you have to apply directly with the landlord to see if you're going to be approved for that. And then how can LCD help with these public benefits? Well, basically, we can work with families to address a wrongful denial of benefits, a reduction of the benefits, or a termination of the benefits, right? So unfortunately, we can't do anything about the fact that the benefits aren't enough, right? We don't have any control over that. We can't do anything about, a denial, reduction, or termination that's, in accordance with the rules or guidelines of that program. But if it's wrongful, we assist clients all the time with getting those things worked out. And also we do a lot of advice and counsel just about the programs, eligibility, what to expect, things like that. All right, so switching gears almost completely, let's talk about advanced planning documents. So the big thing about advanced planning documents, I think it's like in the name, right, is that it's advanced planning, right? So you're planning for something happening in the future, and generally that something is becoming incapacitated in some way. So the name of the game for all these different advanced planning documents is capacity. You got to have the capacity. You have to be of sound mind and understand what's going on when you execute these documents. Unfortunately, if you wait until after you lose capacity, you don't have the option to execute any of these documents. So the first advanced planning document to talk about is powers of attorney. So there's two different kinds, and we'll talk about each. But essentially, a power of attorney doesn't take away anything from the individual who's naming an agent, naming somebody as their power of attorney. So the power of attorney essentially has concurrent authority, and they can make decisions alongside, the individual who has named them as their agent. The person can rescind the power of attorney at any time. And so that's, the individual is not giving anything up by naming somebody as their agent with the power of attorney. So, the individuals need to defer, or different agencies and organizations need to defer to the wishes of the principal, right, over that of their agent if they still have capacity, right? So the agent can't trump the principal. And then there's two different in terms of when the power of attorney will take into effect, there's durable powers of attorney. Essentially, they take effect as soon as the principal signs it. And then there's springing. So you're naming an agent, but their authority doesn't go into effect until you become incapacitated. So for example, they wouldn't be able to get access to your health records while you still had capacity, but in the event that you became incapacitated, their authority to access those records would come into effect. So financial power of attorney is essentially, appointing an individual that you trust to assist with managing financial transactions, financial assets, things like that. And they can handle all different kinds of financial matters. So some of these financial matters include borrowing money, handling real estate, handling tax matters, handling insurance matters. So it can be pretty broad authority, right? One of the things they could do is give away all your stuff. But the power of attorney or the agent is bound, by the duty, to act in good faith and act in your best interest. So while it is pretty broad authority, they are limited by having to execute that authority in your best interest. And so when it comes to naming your agent, you want to pick somebody that you trust, obviously, and that you think, has a good idea of, what your best interest would be. You can appoint 2 agents. The one, there's usually like a primary and a backup, but you can appoint 2. And it's always best to talk to the individual, right, before you're going to name them as your agent, just to make sure that they're actually interested in that kind of responsibility, and that they understand what the responsibility is, and they'll, at least in the way that we execute our powers of attorney, that we have the agents sign as well, acknowledging what their responsibilities are. All right, so healthcare power of attorney. This is an individual who has the power to make healthcare decisions for you. That would include hiring and firing medical personnel, getting access to your protected health information, dealing with the health insurance company. That's another kind of authority, right? It's kind of healthcare adjacent, but it would be covered under this. And again, when it comes to appointing an agent, you want to appoint someone that you trust. It does not have to be the same person that you might have appointed as your financial agent. Maybe the person, who would best know your interests when it comes to medical care is going to be different than the person that you would trust with your financial matters. So just like with a financial power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney has to act in good faith in your best interest. And especially with healthcare, it's very important to communicate your wishes to your agent when it comes to type of treatment you would be interested or not interested in the event that you lacked capacity. Just like with a financial power of attorney, you can name 2 agents. One is generally the primary, and then the other one is the backup if the primary is not available or doesn't wish to act in that capacity. So that's power of attorney. So now living will, also known as an advanced directive. I think advanced directive is a little bit easier, or a more appropriate name for it. And basically this allows somebody to designate the type of life-saving or life-prolonging procedures that they want if in the event that they have an end-stage medical condition. So this can be a standalone document, but it's often incorporated into a healthcare power of attorney, right? So basically, the idea would be you name somebody as your healthcare agent, and then within that same document, you're getting specific about how you want your treatment to look in the event that you have an end stage condition, right? So it's not just up to the power of attorney to know what your wishes would be. You're making it a lot more explicit. And so again, like with with all of these documents, you got to make sure that you're doing this when you have capacity and you're competent to make these kinds of decisions. So a living will can be binding or non-binding. And what that means is, like, so with binding, you know, what's written in that living will and that advance directive is exactly what you want your, you know, your power of attorney to do, right? You don't want them to deviate from it at all. Non-binding is more that it's supposed to be guiding the power of attorney in how to make those types of decisions on your behalf. So it's leaving the possibility open that perhaps something maybe will have changed in between when you, you know, executed the living will and, you know, when the incapacity and end stage condition happens. So you do have that option of kind of how concrete you want those instructions to be for your power of attorney. So the types of, you know, treatments that you would be making a decision about in the living will are all life prolonging procedures. So for example, you know, heart lung resuscitation, whether or not you want to be put on a ventilator, you want dialysis to be, you know, part of the treatment, you know, whether or not you want nutrition or hydration, you know, to be provided. It also allows for the individual who's executing it to decide whether or not they consent to donating their organs or tissues at the time of death. So that's another thing that you can specify in that living will or advance directive. So just kind of a quick wrap up of living will. So you got to have capacity, just like you do with all these other ones. And it does take some of the responsibility out of the healthcare power of attorney, like we said, right? It's giving them much more specific instructions about what they should and shouldn't be doing in the event that you have an end stage condition. But for those who are interested in it, it gives them peace of mind if they have very strong feelings about, you know, what they want to happen in the event that they have an end stage condition. It gives them peace of mind that will be followed, or that that the power of attorney is going to be well aware of what those wishes are in the event that they need to make those kinds of decisions. And then finally, talking about wills. So a will is something that outlines what's going to happen to your stuff upon your death. So in Pennsylvania, every state has their own rules about, you know, what's required to execute a will. In Pennsylvania, it needs to be signed. The individual needs to have capacity, like with all these documents, and it also has to be witnessed. So I believe you need 2 witnesses here in Pennsylvania. And, you know, you need to be, when you're making the will, you need to intend to be making a will. You know, generally that's not an issue, but sometimes if somebody scribbles something down on a napkin or something like that, sometimes that can be a little less obvious. And if you die without a will, there is a statute in Pennsylvania that essentially has a list of individuals who are going to inherit. So, you know, your stuff will be distributed in some fashion. And if you have a will, then you have control over that. If you don't have one, then it's going to be done according to the statute. So that's called dying intestate. So to die without a will. So just a couple key terms when it comes to wills. So an executor or executrix. It's a pretty old school term, but essentially that's the individual that you appoint to settle your estate. So usually in a will, you're going to specify the individual that you would like to administer that estate. And they're the ones that are legally authorized to deal with the assets and handle matters related to estate administration. And then a beneficiary is just an individual who's named in the will as someone who's going to receive property. So what needs to happen with the will is it needs to go through probate. So this is a legal process to settle the estate. So either that's the process of following the wishes in the will, or if the individual has died without one, follow the intestacy statute. It does cost money You know, there's several steps. You got to open up the estate, you have to advertise, file an inventory, and there's other papers that you need to complete for it. It generally takes a few months, assuming that, you know, there's no issues with anyone trying to contest the will or anything like that. But, you know, having the will doesn't mean it's the end of the story. It's still got to go through probate. So how can LCD help with these advanced planning documents? So we execute advanced planning documents for eligible individuals. So power of attorney, if that's going to include a living will with the healthcare power of attorney, we'll do that. And we also do simple wills. We don't handle probate of estates. Okay, so that would be something we would have to refer you elsewhere for, but we can handle drafting a simple will. All right. So thank you so much. I think maybe we're right on time. At 7:15, have about 15 minutes for questions. Happy to, let me stop sharing so that I can see.